Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje for BMF belt, then Nate Diaz for trilogy. Although people are speculating McGregor having to first re-enter the U.S. anti-doping agency testing program, he claims he's absolutely returning to the octagon at UFC 296 in December. The UFC superstar was attending Saturday's Anthony Joshua vs. Robert Helenius boxing event in London, and in an interview with Gareth Davies for TalkSport, McGregor said,
"When are you coming back?
December.
And who are you fighting?"
Chandler.
You are going to do it?
I have to.
You've been teasing him.
I'm going to do that with him, yeah. I'm going to grab him by the chest and grab him. That's what I'm going to do.
Are we going to see you in another boxing match as well, the second richest fight in history when you fought Floyd Mayweather?
Yeah. Yeah, man, KSI over there, he couldn't box eggs. He couldn't box eggs if he worked in a egg boxing factory, yeah?
It's always great to see you. Cheers.
Cheers. Chandler next, December, and then Gaethje BMF, and then we'll do Nate trilogy.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers.
What do you think? Is Conor McGregor fighting Chandler in December? And is his 3-fight UFC return plan doable? Neil Magny replaces injured Geoff Neal, meets Ian Garry at UFC 292. Ian Garry will get the fight he originally wanted for UFC 292. After his win over Daniel Rodriguez at UFC on ABC4, the fighter called out Neil Magny as his next possible opponent.
You are not a guy that is afraid to say who you want to fight next. You will be in the top 15. Who you want to see when you step into the octagon next time?
I want the guy who's been known as the gatekeeper for the top 10 for God knows how long. His name is Neil Magny. I want you next. I'm going to knock you out, and I'm going to take my throne at top 10, and I'm going to work my way through my 6-fight streak to get that belt. UFC, you have a new star in town.
The UFC matchmakers ended scheduling Ian Garry vs. Geoff Neal for UFC 292, and Neal withdrew from the bout due to a medical issue just a couple of weeks prior to the August 19th event. With Geoff Neal withdrawing, Ian Garry now gets his wish granted. The veteran Neil Magny has agreed to step in on short notice and fight the undefeated Ian Garry in a welterweight bout at UFC 292. Who do you think will win this bout, the prospect or the veteran? Derrick Lewis signs new 8-fight contract deal with UFC. The fan-favorite UFC heavyweight revealed he fought out his contract after a 33-second TKO of Marcos Rogerio de Lima with a crazy flying knee at UFC 291 on July 29th. On the post-fight press conference, the fighter made it clear he hoped to re-sign with the UFC, but many were speculating the fighter could rematch Francis Ngannou in PFL for a purse much more enticing than his UFC contract. After his stoppage of Rogerio de Lima, the Black Beast has surpassed welterweight Matt Brown with the UFC's all-time knockout record, now at 14. The promotion confirmed Lewis has been re-signed with the UFC, and while the dollar amount was not disclosed, they have agreed to an 8-bout contract, making the fantasy rematch bout against Ngannou almost impossible to happen. What do you think? Was Lewis smart to re-sign with the UFC? Or should have the fighter experimented free agency and rematch Ngannou in PFL for a speculated $2 million purse? UFC on ESPN 51 highlights. UFC on ESPN 51 took place Saturday, August 12th at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. The card was headlined by Vicente Luque and former lightweight champion Rafael Dos Anjos. Luque returned to competition after a year-long layoff to defeat RDA by unanimous decision in a welterweight main event. After the fight, Luque was very emotional and proud of his performance. The athlete said RDA was the perfect opponent for him to regain confidence after his career was nearly ended due to a brain bleed stemming from his first and only knockout loss to Geoff Neal. He also said he's hoping to share the octagon with any top 5 fighter at 170 pounds in his next fight. And he is open to the idea of welcoming former interim UFC champ Dustin Poirier if he decides to move up to welterweight after his loss to Justin Gaethje for the UFC BMF belt. In the co-main event, Cub Swanson looked legitimately surprised when his name was announced as the winner of the back-and-forth fight with Hakeem Dawodu. When the decision was announced, all 3 judges scored the fight 29-28 for Swanson, who was clapping his hands, and it appeared he was ready to congratulate his opponent. "I felt like I was in the moment and having fun," Swanson said in an Octagon interview with Daniel Cormier. "I thought I took more shots. I always beat myself up so I'd have to watch it again. I was so worried going into this fight. I got a name now and people expect greatness. Here is the scorecard for the fight. After the fights, four fighters picked up an extra $50,000 for their performances at the UFC Apex. Check out the winners. Marcus Magny defeated JP Buys via knockout, punches, in round 1. Yasmin Lucindo defeated Polyana Viana via submission, arm triangle choke, in round 2. Khalil Rountree defeated Chris Daukaus via TKO, punches, in round 1. Damon Blackshear defeated Jose Johnson via submission, twister, in round 1. The UFC now heads to Boston for UFC 292, Aljamain Sterling vs. Sean O'Malley. Here is the upcoming schedule for the next UFC events. Which event are you most excited about? Bellator 298 main card results. Bellator 298 was headlined by a welterweight bout between Logan Storley vs. Brennan Ward. Ward used his left jab often, and it was a problem for Storley in the first round. Midway through round 1, Storley secured a takedown and kept Ward pinned to the canvas for the remainder of the round. The second round began, and Ward continued to use his jab and stalk Storley around the Bellator cage. It was just a matter of time before Storley found his opening and completed another takedown. Frustrated, Ward began trash-talking Storley. But Storley wasn't falling for it, and instead the fighter stayed composed, controlled position, and began ground and pounding Ward with hard punches that made the referee stop the fight. Storley won the fight via TKO stoppage at 4:05 in round 2. Here are the other results for Bellator MMA 298 main card. Valentin Moldavsky defeated Steve Mowry via unanimous decision. Aaron Jeffrey defeated Dalton Rasta via unanimous decision. James Gallagher defeated James Gonzalez via split decision. Sidney Outlaw defeated Islam Maindov via unanimous decision. Bellator MMA announced 4 world title fights headlining their historic 300th card on Saturday, October 7th, in San Diego, California. And it looks like this card will be one for the ages. Heavyweight world champion Ryan Bader defends his belt in a rematch against number 1 ranked Lenton Vassell. Bellator featherweight world champion Chris Cyborg will face number 1 ranked Kat Zingano in what can best be described as a grudge match between 2 of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. The $1 million Bellator lightweight world Grand Prix rolls on, when undefeated champion Usman Nurmagomedov puts his belt on the line against former champion and current number 4 ranked Brent Primus in a semi-final matchup. And 2 of San Diego's top fighters, close friends and training partners collide as Liz Carmouche defends her belt against former world champion and number 2 ranked Elimale McFarlane. Who do you think are winning these bouts?